but I think we can begin.
Excellent. Cool. So just to overview, we have the board, the Cannabis Control Board has 5 rules. Technically, it has 4 that are enacted. The 5th one hasn't really been enacted through LCAR. But just to overview, those rules are Rule 1, the licensing of cannabis establishments. Rule 2 is the regulation of cannabis establishments. Rule 3 is medical cannabis. Rule 4 is compliance and enforcement. And then Rule 5 is the board removal process. So what we are looking at today are Rule 1, which is basically defining the licensing of cannabis establishments. It has all of the details, as we're aware, of those licenses. Speaking a little bit about process and what all of this means before we get into it. Just because the board has made a proposed change, first of all, that doesn't mean that it's going to happen. There is a deliberative process, but it also means that we can bring to the table other changes. So just because, for instance, we don't see the CCB changing a certain section of, say, Rule 1, or they have not even gone into Rule 3, that doesn't mean that we can't compel them to do so. So keep all of this in mind. We are not limited as a community, as the general public, to basically talking about and modifying the proposed changes that the board made. We can bring our own changes and our own concepts and ideas as well, collectively, or as an individual. So a little bit about process. We are technically in the rule amendment process. It's pretty similar to the initial rulemaking process, such that the state dictates there's law for rulemaking. We should expect the board to have some public input meetings and to talk about the rules over the next month. So there will be an opportunity, not just us as an organization and you as individuals and businesses, to provide public commentary through the website at any moment during this process, but also there will be meetings. For instance, there will be a CCB board meeting next week. They're now meeting monthly, as we know, so that is on Monday. The board will also have, to be announced, more public input meetings specific to these rules. So keep all of this in mind. That's why we as an organization, we're holding this event now in sort of the middle of this rulemaking process, or should I say rule amendment process. So we're all informed. We can individually or collectively speak to and inform the CCB and influence their process. Just to step back, this process started, the board kicked it off November 30th in their board meeting. They offered these proposed changes we're about to go through. We are about halfway through the process, and we are looking, now it's not set in stone, but it seems like tentatively it's going to conclude at the end of February. But the board will communicate more of this to us as the public, and we'll share what we hear with everybody as well. So all that being said, we're going to go through now Rule 1, proposed changes. I'm going to share my screen. We're going to go through and read each item. We're going to pause, and we're going to have take questions, have a conversation about each item, and then we're going to go through all of them. And that's going to be today. And again, we're going to try and wrap up a little over an hour. So that's that. Throughout the course of this event, please feel free to raise your hand, drop a question in the Q&A. Bernie and I will be catching that, and we'll work into the conversation. All right, so I'm going to share my screen right now, and we'll look at proposed changes for Rule 1. Okay, so the board has proposed about just under 20 changes for Rule 1, and we're going to go through them now. They're starting with, let's see here, definitions. And again, for those of you that are just joining, or if you missed it, what we are looking at, these 3 PDFs we dropped in the chat. Bernie, if you want to drop them in the chat again, it's up to you. They are all available, everyone, through the CCB website. So if you go to the CCB's website and then go to the rules section, you will see the 3 draft rules And that is what we're going over now. This is rule 1. So starting with rule 1, and by the way, just to share, a lot of these changes are technical. They're not really substantive in scope. Some of them are, have a little bit more substance, but just note that a lot of them are sort of technical, or they're sort of like minor in scope, meaning like maybe the CCB was already operating that way and they're sort of capturing that new operation in the rules. So, all right, so the first proposed change that the CCB has made to rule 1 is in definitions 1.13. This is a technical change. This definition was only intended to apply to the positive impact criteria for employee rate here. So what we're basically doing, the board is striking this and moving it elsewhere in the document. And then they sort of make the changes to the listing here. So that's what we see. We see some redlining, they're striking through, and then they're offering the proposed change. So this was mostly just to avoid confusion. This definition still resides in the rules. It has just been moved. So that is the first change. I don't know if there's going to be any questions, but Bernie, you want to?
I mean, it's just technical.
Okay.
So I think we can slide to the next one.
Okay, excellent. So the next one is surrounding outdoor cultivation. And what we have here, this is the first sort of substantive change. And what we have here is outdoor, I'll read it. Outdoor cultivation means growing cannabis in a manner that does not use artificial lighting, providing that outdoor cultivators may use the minimum amount of artificial lighting necessary to keep photoperiod plants in a vegetative state. Artificial lighting for outdoor cultivation must not extend beyond May 1st in a calendar year or past when the specific cultivar can sustain vegetative growth under natural light, whichever comes first. So they're clearly expanding the definition, or at least adding more words. And they're basically, broadening the exemptions for artificial light. That's what we have here for the sort of first substantive change in Rule 1.
Yeah, it's interesting to me that the way that it was worded, because it means you could put out artificial light in April or March and really get a season going to flower early. It doesn't say anything about covering or light depth and stuff, so it's really opening the door for cultivators to have 2 seasons if they want to in Vermont, which can be tough. But the option is there now. I mean, I think we had a direct conversation with Carrie about this, right, Jeff? And it was like he's not concerned about using lights early on. The CCB has more of a concern about people who are just trying to flower with lights outside on like a supplemental level. This doesn't, there's no limit towards using light towards the end of the year, but it's just for vegetative state. So if they come out to you and they see you're using supplemental lighting in October, it's probably going to be a violation. I don't know if anyone has any input or thoughts on this. I think it's good because it allows for 2. It just kind of simplifies outdoor growing so much that people can end up doing whatever they want.
And again, feel free to drop your thoughts in the Q&A, in the chat, or just raise your hand, and Bernie or one of us, or I will call on you. So feel free to jump in at any time. Okay, so that's the second change. Moving on, third change. These are basically just a couple of edits to make things more sort of explicitly clear here under sort of section N and O. They add a new section. Or they don't add a new section, just editing some of the listing. But basically, the board is trying to clarify things around incarceration, and they wanted to explicitly exclude any sort of pre-trial sentencing. This is, I would say, sort of a technical change because this is how the board has been operating. They're just putting it in rules a little bit more explicitly. So they're trying to bring clarity to sort of around incarceration with regards to social equity and other businesses. So we're still in definition. So that is that change right there. Bernie, any thoughts, or anyone in the crowd?
No, I think I just heard rumblings about the CCB having to explain this to applicants and stuff, that it was just an arrest is not enough, a conviction is not enough, but it's actual incarceration that they're looking for in the definition. So just, more just getting everyone on the same page, I think.
No hands, we'll move on. The fourth change down here is just sort of more technical changes in this whole area, some technical changes sort of cleaning up some of the listing and whatnot. But basically down here, what we have is this new section down here, II, is basically if you meet any of the three criteria up here, it basically just brings clarity to what that means. So again, this is not really substantive. This is a technical change to bring clarity, sort of, again, how the board has been acting. They adopted the policy as a matter of fact, and they're just sort of putting it into rules. So this is a little bit more clarity in addition to sort of similar to the incarceration area. I'll stop there. Any questions? And again, this is just all about we're still in the section for social equity businesses and sort of what constitutes one of these businesses. All right, Bernie, you good?
Yep.
All right, we'll move on. This is a substantive change. So in here, basically, they're trying to bring some clarity to disproportionately impacted areas, specifically by cannabis prohibition. This might even get changed in the future, but some of the notes for what we're looking at here, basically, they're trying to bring clarity to what a disproportionately impacted area is, and they added some language. So they added SNAP benefits and then FDPIR. FDPIR is basically a SNAP benefit, but for Native American reservations. So what we're saying is, if you have done any of these things or have satisfied any of these criteria, then basically you are eligible or qualify as an individual that is from a community that has been disproportionately impacted by cannabis prohibition. So I'll stop there. Bernie, I don't know if you have any questions, any hands. We are still in definitions, everybody. This is the last change in the definitions area. And just some notes, I guess, further down here, it says, for the purposes of the subsection, community does not mean professional civic associations, social organizations, clubs, advocacy organizations, and whatnot. So again, they're just trying to bring clarity to exactly what a community means. I will share that the sort of definitions around social equity are a point of contention, not just in Vermont, but in other states. So what the board's trying to do is just try to shore up themselves here. All right, we'll move on. So we're at 1.1.4 applicability. And what this area represents, this is sort of substantive. So basically, this past year in 2022, lawmakers in the State House, they gave a new authority to the Cannabis Control Board to regulate hemp-derived products. I believe that's Act 158, 2022, which was Bill S-188. So what this basically is doing is it's operationalizing that statute. So it's allowing the board to manage or regulate these products, and it's basically they're determining the threshold is anything over 1 milligram. So that's what we have here, kind of substantive, but also sort of technical, and they were required to do this by statute. Any questions, Bernie, or from attendees before we move on? All right, next section is.
I have a question, Jeff. Did they just broadly define tetrahydrocannabinol there so that it's inclusive of Delta 8 and Delta 9 products separately, even though Delta 8 products are derived from hemp?
That's a good
Because that's
question.
technically THC, right? I think that's why they did that. So basically, if you say, even if it's Delta 8, if you say it's THC, or you list it with having the Delta 8 tetrahydrocannabinol, it must be how they were going to manage that. So then basically, yeah, it falls into the board and it's THC. I'm curious if they're going to allow importing of Delta 8. Just throwing it out there.
Great. If we are good with that one, next one, the 8th change, going to 131. So a lot of this is unchanged. Going down to mixed. So basically what we have here is they're striking out the outdoor portion of, so it's just basically this changes bringing clarity to sort of how the board has already operated, which is the entirety of the crop has to be within 2 spans. And this is just for mixed. So just a little point of clarity right there for the mixed year. Any questions? All right, the 9th change, moving on. Let's see, we're moving into manufacturing. So 133, the manufacturing tier. This is, I believe, another technical change. Oh, no, so this is, let's see here. So we are, what the board is making this this next change is the board is basically saying that tier 2 is not allowed to do supercritical CO2. So they're adding that to in statute, or rather in rules, to tier 2. So they're not allowed to do that. That is just limited solely to tier 3, as we know. So that is the change in this area. After that, the next change is for tier 1, and the board is proposing that they change the gross revenue each year for tier 1 to 50,000 from 10,000. I think as no, 10,000 was not practical, and I want to pause and say this is actually requires legislation. So some of these rules are technically legislative recommendations. And why is that? Because the State House lawmakers are the ones to enact some of these policies, but not all of them. Typically ones that involve money, appropriations, or ones that were pre-existing in statute. So for instance, the THC caps, we're all aware of that. That is in statute. So if the board wants to make a change, they need to make a recommendation to lawmakers. In this instance, for tier 1 manufacturers, it's both in rules. So the Cannabis Control Board is defining it themselves. And then also that becomes a legislative recommendation, and then lawmakers need to make that change. So what this means is, pardon me, because 10,000 gross is in statute, what we're seeing here is a proposed legislative change, but the board feels like they want the rules to reflect that. To add to this, we as an organization, we have a bill which has yet to be made public, a revision to this, and we actually bump it up to 100,000 and not 50,000. So what that means is, just hypothetically, if our bill were to become enacted, the board would then be forced to adopt that statute, which is 100,000. And so they would then update their rules to 100,000, even though they're here proposing 50,000. So it's a little bit of a tangled mess. There are some things that the board can act on themselves. There are others where they need to sort of do it in concert with lawmakers. And then the third tier is there are things where lawmakers simply do themselves. without the board input. This is one of those instances where it's collaborative. So that's the change for a tier 1 manufacturer. Any questions? Bernie, any comments?
No. I mean, I think the Kyle said it. His only the CCB's argument to not raising the tier 1 revenue exception is because he wants to disincentivize home businesses, and if the businesses are succeeding, they want them to move into commercial spaces or whatever, right? Like that's what he said, I think, during this meeting. So I think the argument against that is the lack of commercial space in Vermont, and how many commercial spaces are actually former homes that were converted. So it's just kind of silly to think that way. But that's what we're up against in terms of the CCB having any issues with raising it beyond 50,000. I think it's just because they think if you're making that much, you should be moving into a commercially zoned area. But yeah, let's move on. Unless, Amy has a question here.
Thanks for joining us, Amy.
I'm just thinking about tax implications and 280E, and the fact that, we're only allowed to deduct cost of goods sold.
Mm-hmm.
So that's going to bite really hard into any profit that we make, not including like the huge banking fees and the huge insurance fees. Tier 1 at current position it's not possible to make any profit. Everyone has got to be underwater. So the hope is to, be able to kick it up to tier 2. I'm not sure that $50,000 cap is going to be able to cover that.
Amy, I'm curious, have you, my understanding was that the biggest issue with 280E and write-offs was to retailers because they're not making anything. There's no, you know what I mean? They're buyers and sellers. And so everything is nothing's a write-off, but with producers, you can write off all of you still have 280E allows you to write off like inputs and stuff that go directly into the production of your products. I mean, as a manufacturer, that was my understanding.
But if you understand looking at, like a balance sheet, cost of goods sold is only a chunk of it. It's not all of our overhead. Right. And especially, working out of, a home situation, I would need to see the numbers, and I'm going to look very carefully at them with my accountant in the next week or so. But just doing the basic numbers from the get with this, I can tell you unequivocally, there's no way to make a profit with its current 10K. And looking deeper, I don't know that there's going to be much of a profit at 50 either. So if the cost of kicking it up to tier 2 is substantial, which it is, I'm not sure that 50,000 cap is going to provide enough room to make enough money to kick it up to the tier 2.
Right. Yeah, no, I mean, I'm just thinking about like all of my insurance costs for the coming year. And then banking, if I have multiple licenses as a manufacturer and cultivator, and that's just the banking is like 20,000 or 25,000 for the year. So it's like if my revenue's capped at 50 and my banking costs 25 plus all the insurance costs, I mean, it's not worth it.
Right. That's exactly what I'm pointing out.
Excellent. Appreciate that. Amy, thank you for that feedback. Okay. If we're good, happy to move on. All right. The next change here, we are in 1.34, changing tiers. So the CCB added some language. This provision will not apply to tier 1 outdoor cultivators who may apply to move to a higher outdoor tier at any time using a method approved by the board upon renewal or approval. So basically what this is the board is making it a little bit easier for outdoor tier 1 cultivators specifically to move up. That's what this language does. Any questions or thoughts on this before we move on? All right, we will move into the next proposed change. We are in 145. We are looking at insurance, taxation, and banking. Let's see here. So in 145, we've got a sort of a couple substantive and some points of clarity. So the first one here, B, is another point of clarity. This is around escrow. Basically, they're clarifying that it needs to be a third party to hold the account, and they've removed the word bond. They said it's not needed. The board's basically trying to move away from individual bonds. But again, this is just a point of clarity. So documentation of bond or third party escrow, after you do strike bond, they need to update this to the satisfaction of the board for costs related to cessation of operations of a cannabis establishment in an amount to be determined by board guidance. So again, this is just a point of clarity. Any questions on that before we move on? The next one is 149. So we are looking at plans related to positive impact criteria. So this is what businesses need to do to comply to further positive impact mandates. This is where basically first of all, the employee definition went to. So this is where it got moved to from definition. So if we recall the very first change, there it is. It's still in rules. It's just in the positive impact criteria. I believe the board was saying was causing some confusion being up in the definitions for all areas. So they moved into this more narrow section. We also see some technical changes. So that's what the first change here is the moving of the employee definition. Then from there, the other change, and this is more of a substantive one down here, and I'll read it first. This new area, this new section reads, for retailers, a plan to pay the applicable taxes on behalf of a medical patient registered pursuant to a code, and then rule 3.2 may count toward one of the criteria that would otherwise be needed to meet in this subsection. So basically what this is saying is the board is allowing retailers to develop a plan to pay for medical patients' taxes, and that can satisfy the impact criteria section here, if they so wish. And by the way, for those who are unfamiliar, the positive impact criteria is required if you have a certain level, certain number of employees. So lots of sole proprietors and businesses with, an employee or two don't need to do this. This is for those with more employees. They tend to be retailers. So I'll stop there. Any questions or comments? We will move on. So a lot of the strikeout that we see with listings and whatnot that you will see throughout the document, when a section is added or removed, they're just making the appropriate sort of technical changes here. So that's all that it really is. So we're down into 1.7 now, license application requirements for retailers. This is another sort of technical required by statute, even though it's substantive. This is making, putting into operation the new authority that the board has to regulate hemp and hemp-derived products and compounds. So that's what this is here. This is language for retailers, enabling them to do so. So what it says is retailers must comply with all relevant statutes and board rules related to CBD, hemp, and hemp-derived compounds. All right, any questions? We'll move on. The next proposed change is under the integrated licensees. So this is an interesting one. I don't know we're unsure if this is political or not, but what we see here is we see some changes to item E for the integrated licensees. Quote, plan to contribute to the Cannabis Business Development Fund. So they're striking out the cost of the license, the integrated license, and then they're removing the date. The board says that they're doing this to clean up this area and bring it up to statute. We are past October 1st, 2022. And if the license fee changes or whatnot, then they don't want it reflected in the rules. So again, some of this could be political in nature or not. We're sort of unsure, but that is the change here to the integrated licensees. Any questions, comments? Moving on, we are almost through this document. The next proposed change by the board is section 111.3, overcoming presumptive disqualification. And basically this is just the board putting into rule the way that it has been operating. And they just wanted to sort of state this more plainly. So this is another sort of technical point of clarity for the board. And what they added, the language reads, a person will be deemed qualified if the board finds that granting them a license will not pose a threat to the safety of the legal cannabis market or the general public. So again, this is section overcoming presumptive disqualification. So this is for the license application process. Any questions, comments before we move on?
Jeff, Sarah White is having an issue looking at the documents.
Oh.
She said she's not having access to the chat window, but I sent her a message saying that it should be in the main window with it should be in the main window with a video, like through the screen share, not in the chat window. If you're looking for are you looking for the links to the documents, Sarah? I would just pop on the CCB website and they're there as draft documents.
And Bernie, if you want to grab those links again.
I think I can share them here. Hold on.
I think sometimes when people join, and if a chat was already sent, they may not see like the previous chat kind of thing. But again, for those of you that are able to see the screen, we're reading through Rule 1. We're almost done. And all of these documents are available on the CCB website. Bernie will be sharing the links. So just to round out this document, we're past 111.3. The next change in this document for Rule 1 should be 117. Let's see here. All right, section 1.17. Change of license control or change of license location requires a license renewal application. Basically this can be described as a tightening of the rules. I will read it. What is added in this section is under either of the following changes to a license requires a licensee to submit a license renewal application in accordance with the terms of this section and section 115 of this rule, and they add the sentence, the board may waive this subsection 117AI at its discretion for de minimis changes in control, but in every case, licensees will be required to notify the board of changes in control. So basically, what they're saying here is that through their experience since opening up the licensing process, they have identified that a full renewal process is not needed every time, but they wish for licensees to notify the board of the changes. So what this point of clarity or what this language is basically saying is they expect all licensees to notify the board when they want to make any changes to their license, but they may not require full renewal for each of those instances. And it's up to the discretion of the board. So for instance, there might be a minor change of like a control of a principle, or you're making, a non-substantive change to your license. You would not, for instance, in this hypothetical, need to renew your license altogether. They will use their discretion and just make that change. So that's what this section is describing. Any questions? Any comments? So again, this is basically how the board has been operating. They're just sort of capturing some of their, what we're seeing is the board is sort of refining some of its operations just through experience and going through this for the first time. So they're catching a lot of these refinements in text and making that appropriate change in the rule. I think we're on the last section of Rule 1. Let's see here. Yep. So Rule 1 concludes the proposed changes, concludes with the interesting area. So if we all recall, we're at section 1.18, waiver provisions for tier 1 cultivators. So this is the section where there's like, something like 14 or 12 exemptions for tier 1 cultivators to make the market more accessible. The statutory original intent was basically to help transition the legacy market. So this speaks to that. This speaks to having a more accessible tier 1 for all tiers, indoor, outdoor, and mixed. So what we see here, this was sort of a point of contention compared to some of the other proposed rule changes. What the board is doing in this section is they're going through all of the exemptions, and they're basically making changes by saying these are now required for renewal, but they are not required necessarily for initial licensure. So the change that the board is proposing here is the exemptions, largely speaking, are staying, but they're removing the exemptions for renewal. So let's go through some of them. So item A right here is basically provide that licensees must provide such a description upon renewal for any criminal action that may have occurred in the prior year. So what this means is, originally, first of all tiers needed this, right? So this is exemption for tier 1. So if you're tier 2 or above, and if you're listening, you're probably familiar with this, you needed to submit your criminal activity over the past year, if there was any. Say you were charged with something, you need to, it's disclosure. So what the board's now saying is it's not required still for initial licensees, but they are requiring it for renewals. So if you're a tier 1, what does this mean materially? You go to renew your license, you will be asked now to provide any criminal action from over the past 12 months or since your licensure. So that's what this first item means. Just to go through them really quickly. Item B, provide that licensees must provide such a description upon renewal for any civil action that may have commenced or resolved in the prior year. So similar as the top one, but instead of criminal activity or action, it's civil action. So that would be, the board is asking for that to be provided upon renewal. All of the sections for, all of the items for 144 mostly are regarding compliance and management. So for instance, this item, and there's a couple of them, there's a lot of them. And these are like plans and stuff like that. So for instance, A here, or C, that item right there, is a plan for dispersal and disposal of inventory, right? That's what that is. So in this one right here, they're asking the board, or they're asking licensees, if you're an initial licensee, you don't need to provide that plan for disposing of your product. But if you're renewing as a tier 1, then you do need to provide that plan. I guess the expectation is you've been doing this for theoretically a year, and upon renewal, you should have this plan in place. We don't necessarily agree with that, but that's what this is. We're just explaining it. Just to finish reading through these before we take questions. The other ones that they're changing provide that licensee must provide the overview upon renewal. So F is an overview of staffing and positions. So basically you need to describe your positions of the business and the potential staffing. F here is upon renewal, the board is now asking for the responsibilities of those staffing, those roles. So they first, E is they want a list of, the positions in your company. F is the responsibilities of those roles. So that's new. And again, only upon renewal. G is local ordinances. So basically, the board is asking that tier 1 licensees upon renewal commit to abiding by, they attest to abiding by any local ordinances or local control options. Let's see here. H here, down here, the last item is employee training. So they're asking tier 1 renewals to basically have hiring and training protocols for their employees. So yeah, so that's that. And the rest are sort of staying as is. For instance, these two bottom ones are wastewater, and there's exemptions for home occupancy businesses, yada, 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 yada. But that is rounding out Rule 1. Kind of took some time, but I'll stop there. So this is the last section for Rule 1's proposed changes. Any questions, any comments? I know I said a lot. Can we get a quick show of hands? Who do we have any licensed cultivators with us this evening? You guys want to show of hands? See if we have any, not specifically tier 1. All right, so that is Rule 1. So we will now go through Rule 2. And by the way, going back to Rule 1, our position is that none of this should change. For the exemptions, we're not even a year into this market. We think that they should stay the same. We think that it's too early to begin to maybe narrow down some of these exemptions, because we think, largely speaking, we have not transitioned most of the legacy market. And so if anything, we would want to maybe even consider adding to some of these waivers, some of these exemptions. So that is where we are at.